With F1's regulation overhaul set to come into play from 2022, including brand new aero, the return of Venturi tunnels, wheel covers and more, the 1.6-litre turbo hybrid V6 power units are one of the components that haven't really been changed in the regulations. They might have a new, more sustainable E10 fuel coursing through them, and they'll contain some more standard components in the fuel system, thanks to the Ferrari fuel flow debacle, but all in all they'll be the same type of engine as they were in 2021. Since the introduction of the V6 turbo hybrid engines in Formula 1 back in 2014, the technology, the sound and the cost have all been attacked by fans and teams alike. But all in all, you can argue it was a necessary move and, despite its drawbacks, provided a future direction while keeping F1 road relevant. Arguments over the halo have quietened down after some high-profile accidents, but F1's V6 turbo hybrid engine still gets some flack. The points of attack usually concern the sound, aka they're too quiet, the cost, or the argument that everything is going towards electric, so what's the point in keeping a formula that includes an internal combustion engine as part of the equation? Let's deal with the first point, the engine sound. Now let's be honest here, today's cars aren't really that quiet. They're not as loud as the V8s that preceded them, but those 2.4 litre engines weren't actually that nice to listen to. And now you have half a chance of holding a conversation at the track during a Grand Prix, which was not the case before. The V10s of the pre-2006 era, and of course the V12s that ran before that, did sound magnificent, and would get our vote in terms of audio sensation. I mean, just listen to this. That is, unless you go all the way back to the 50s and listen to the BRM V16 engine, which Autosport chief editor Kevin Turner says for his money is the best sounding F1 engine bar none. But going back to today's modern cars, they're much more reminiscent of the first F1 turbo era of the 1980s, with the likes of the Williams Honda and the Lotus Renault, both V6 engines, and there aren't too many fans who would criticise that period for the sound of the machines. But what about the cost? The cost of the engines was certainly high when hybrids replaced the V8s for 2014. Given the direction of the automotive industry away from the traditional internal combustion engine, F1 probably had to go that way to stay relevant. Allowing F1 to fall further behind will have resulted in decreasing manufacturer interest and eventually increasing calls for it to cease due to social or environmental concerns. But more recently, the delay of F1's new chassis and aero rules from 2021 to 2022, the team's cost cap and the engine freeze has shown that F1 has finally responded to escalating budgets. In other words, the big expense has already happened. And then there's the go all electric argument. At least in the short to medium term, Formula E and Extreme E are there already, and for Formula 1 it's too early to commit to one solution. Not to mention that Formula E has an exclusivity contract for single-seater electric racing until 2039. So without discussing this with Formula E founder and CEO Alejandro Agag, a fully electric F1 car looks a way off. Aside from the electric avenue, hydrogen power and, more relevant to F1's case, synthetic fuels are already avenues worth pursuing for wider society. SCE Managing Director and former Ricardo engineer Steve Sapsford spoke about this recently, saying that there's 34 million cars with traditional combustion engines in the UK alone, and there's an opportunity for renewable and sustainable fuels to be used in all of these vehicles in the future. Formula 1 sticking to turbo hybrid engines but moving towards sustainable fuels, much like the E10 fuels being introduced next year, will both reduce carbon emissions and show the world that there is an alternative to fully electric road cars that also deals with the cars that are currently on the road, keeping F1 much more relevant. All in all, when it comes to competitiveness, there's no doubt that the introduction of the turbo hybrid units spread out the F1 field and helped Mercedes steal a march that has yet to be overcome. But the 2022 regulations look to address that, with an aim for closer racing and a reduction of the dirty air downforce issue. Coupled with this, the current engines are the most fuel efficient in F1 history, and they provide an opportunity for Formula 1 to stay relevant in the coming years. Are they really all that bad?